The funeral was a somber event, held under a sky thick with gray clouds, as if the heavens mourned alongside the gathered crowd. The air was heavy with grief, the only sounds being the soft rustling of leaves as a gentle wind moved through the nearby trees. Friends and family stood silently, clutching tissues or dabbing at tear-streaked faces, each lost in their memories of Amelia. She had been a beacon of kindness in the small town, and her loss left a void that words couldn't fill. Nature itself seemed to pay tribute to her, but then, the tranquility shattered. The interruption came in the form of Max, Amelia's loyal golden retriever, who began barking uncontrollably. It wasn't just a single bark, it was an urgent, relentless noise that grew louder with each passing second. Max wasn't just a pet, he had been Amelia's constant companion, following her wherever she went. His sudden behavior drew startled glances from the mourners. People exchanged uneasy looks, murmuring questions under their breath. "What's wrong with him?" someone whispered. "Is he seeing something?" another muttered, their voice tinged with unease. Max's focus was unwavering. His eyes locked on the closed casket at the front, his body tense, and his barking carried an intensity that was impossible to ignore. His behavior seemed more than instinctual, it felt purposeful, as though he were trying to convey something beyond human comprehension. Children huddled closer to their parents, some shivering with a fear they didn't fully understand. Stories of dogs sensing the supernatural or perceiving dangers invisible to humans surfaced in hushed conversations, heightening the already palpable tension. Max's reputation in the village preceded him. Everyone knew he was an exceptionally intelligent dog, almost preternaturally so. Over the years, he had shown signs of uncanny awareness, whether it was finding lost items or predicting storms before they arrived. Now, his inexplicable behavior made even the most skeptical among the mourners pause. What was Max trying to tell them? Why couldn't he stop barking? The priest, Father Jonathan, stood near the casket, his face a mixture of concern and irritation. As the focal point of the ceremony, he had been delivering comforting words, guiding the community through their collective grief. But now, all attention had shifted to Max and his unrelenting display. Father Jonathan cleared his throat, attempting to regain control of the moment. "Please," he said, raising his hands in a calming gesture. "Let's not allow this distraction to take away from our remembrance of Amelia." His words fell flat. The crowd remained fixated on Max, their whispers growing louder. The priest's composure began to falter. His eyes darted nervously toward the casket, and a faint sheen of sweat appeared on his brow. Taking a deep breath, he walked over to Max, crouching slightly as he extended a hand toward the dog. "Come now, Max," Father Jonathan said softly, forcing a smile. "There's nothing to worry about. Calm yourself." But Max was unmoved. His barking continued, louder and more insistent. When the priest tried to stroke his head, the dog pulled back, emitting a low growl. It wasn't an aggressive growl but rather one of warning, as if Max was protecting something, or someone. The priest's discomfort became more evident as he straightened, his forced smile wavering. "Perhaps someone could take him outside," he suggested, his voice uneven. But no one moved. All eyes were glued to the unfolding scene. Max's behavior was too deliberate to ignore. His posture, his fixed gaze, and his refusal to be silenced created an almost electric tension in the room. Whispers rippled through the crowd. "Why won't he stop?" someone asked. "Do you think he senses something?" Father Jonathan, now visibly sweating, adjusted his collar. "It's just a dog," he said, his laugh brittle and unnatural. "Let us return to the ceremony." But Max wouldn't relent, and neither would the growing unease in the room. Whatever was happening, it was clear that this funeral was about to take a very unexpected turn. Though Father Jonathan's voice was calm as he tried to pacify the growing unease, a flicker of discomfort was visible in his mannerisms. Deep down, he seemed unsettled, as if he sensed something larger was at play, something that Max, Amelia's devoted dog, refused to let anyone ignore. Whispers began to ripple through the mourners, soft yet charged with suspicion. Some couldn't help but notice that Father Jonathan avoided looking directly at the casket, his eyes darting elsewhere as though he were deliberately avoiding whatever Max seemed to be fixated on. "Does he know something?" an elderly woman murmured to her companion, her tone low but laced with suspicion. Others in the congregation shifted uncomfortably, feeling a subtle yet chilling energy in the room. Even the children, their usual curiosity tinged with fear, huddled closer to their parents. The air felt heavier, almost oppressive, as though an invisible presence had descended upon the church. Father Jonathan, recognizing that the tension was mounting and spiraling out of his control, raised his voice in an authoritative yet wavering tone. "Please," he said firmly, gesturing toward Max, "someone take the dog outside. Let us focus on honoring Amelia's memory." But Max refused to move. His relentless barking continued, his sharp gaze fixed unwaveringly on the casket. He didn't seem scared or agitated in the ordinary sense, rather, his behavior radiated a determined urgency, as if he were trying to warn everyone about something they couldn't see. The more the priest attempted to restore order, the more the tension grew. Every passing moment made it harder for the mourners to shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Amid the uneasy crowd, a man stood apart, watching the scene unfold with sharp interest. His name was Daniel, a relative newcomer to the village, who had arrived only a few months prior. Though many didn't know him well, Daniel had quietly made a place for himself in the town. For reasons even he didn't fully understand, he had developed a deep respect for Amelia despite only meeting her a handful of times. Her warmth and generosity had left a lasting impression, and now, standing in the church filled with unease, he couldn't help but feel that Max's behavior was no coincidence. Daniel was naturally inquisitive, drawn to puzzles and mysteries, and he couldn't ignore the dog's extraordinary behavior. As Max's barking pierced the air, Daniel felt a strange pull, as though he was meant to intervene. Without hesitation, he stepped forward, adjusting his coat and striding toward Max with quiet determination. The congregation fell silent, their eyes shifting to Daniel. Who was this man, and what did he think he was doing? Kneeling beside the agitated golden retriever, Daniel spoke in a low, soothing tone, "Hey there, buddy. What's got you so worked up? What are you trying to show us?" To everyone's surprise, Max stopped barking for a brief moment, tilting his head as if assessing Daniel's intentions. His intelligent eyes seemed to carry a mix of fear and urgency, as if silently pleading for someone to listen. Daniel met the dog's gaze, a chill running down his spine at the weight of the unspoken message. Slowly, Daniel turned his attention toward the casket, following Max's lead. The tension in the air seemed to thicken. "What's he doing now?" someone whispered, their voice barely audible. "Leave the dog alone," another man interjected, his tone impatient. "This is a funeral, not a spectacle." Daniel didn't respond to the protests. His focus remained on Max and the casket. "I think he's trying to tell us something," he said, his voice steady. "Maybe we should listen." Max wagged his tail slightly, an acknowledgement that Daniel had understood. Then, as if on cue, the dog began sniffing the ground and took slow, deliberate steps toward the casket, his entire posture radiating purpose. Daniel followed, his heart pounding as he realized that whatever lay ahead was about to reveal something far more significant than anyone in the church could have anticipated. The neighbors began murmuring among themselves, exchanging uneasy glances and whispering in hushed tones about the mysterious sensitivity animals seemed to possess. Stories resurfaced of dogs and cats that supposedly detected unseen dangers or supernatural presences before humans even had an inkling. Max's unsettling behavior left everyone on edge. Standing near the golden retriever, Daniel couldn't help but suggest, "Maybe he's sensing something we can't see." His words hung in the air, and the tension inside the church grew heavier. Silence settled over the mourners as they contemplated the possibilities. Could Max truly be perceiving something supernatural, or was there a deeper mystery surrounding Amelia's death? Father Jonathan, standing stiffly near the altar, grew visibly uneasy. His face, pale and tense, betrayed his attempt to maintain composure. Sensing that the situation was slipping out of his control, he took a deep breath, adjusted his cassock, and stepped forward with deliberate authority. Raising his hands to address the gathering, he spoke with a voice that aimed for calmness but quivered with barely concealed nerves. "Please, everyone, let's remain calm," he urged, his gaze sweeping over the congregation. "We are here to honor Amelia's memory, someone who was so dear to all of us." His words, meant to restore order, only deepened the growing unease. Father Jonathan's eyes landed on Daniel, who still knelt beside Max, intently focused on the dog's peculiar behavior. The priest's expression hardened, his voice growing sharper. "It is inappropriate," he declared loudly, "for anyone to cause such a commotion during this sacred moment." Some in the church nodded in agreement, hesitant to question the priest's authority. But others cast skeptical glances his way, their doubt growing with every word. Why did he seem so nervous? Why was he so desperate to silence the interruption? The atmosphere was thick with suspicion, and Father Jonathan's attempts to restore order only seemed to fuel the congregation's unease. Then, pointing directly at Daniel with a trembling hand, the priest's tone became harsher. "What you are doing is disrespectful to Amelia," he said, his voice rising. "Leave that dog alone and stop distracting everyone with these foolish antics." Daniel felt the weight of the priest's words pressing against him like a challenge. But something about Father Jonathan's exaggerated urgency, his desperate need to dismiss Max's behavior, only heightened Daniel's suspicions. He remained steadfast, his determination unwavering. Beside him, Max let out a low, deliberate growl, his steady gaze still fixed on the casket. It was as if the dog, too, disapproved of the priest's tone. Realizing he was losing control of the crowd, Father Jonathan's demeanor shifted again. This time, his voice carried a pleading edge. "Please," he said, looking around at the gathered mourners. "Do not allow Amelia's memory to be tarnished by this behavior. Let us return to our purpose, to pray for her soul and her eternal peace." But for many in the room, peace seemed further away with every passing moment. The priest's words, intended to quell the unrest, rang hollow. Those observing closely noticed the sweat beading on his brow and the faint tremor in his hands. For some, his visible discomfort only added to the growing sense that something wasn't right. A heavy silence fell over the congregation as everyone turned their attention back to Daniel and Max. The air was thick with anticipation, and all eyes were fixed on the pair. Finally, Daniel spoke, his voice steady and firm. "Father Jonathan," he asked, "how exactly did Amelia die?" The question shattered the silence like a stone tossed into a still pond, its ripples spreading quickly through the gathered mourners. Murmurs erupted as people exchanged surprised and curious glances. Father Jonathan's eyes widened in visible alarm, his carefully constructed composure beginning to crack. "What do you mean?" the priest stammered, his voice unsteady. "Amelia passed away peacefully, in her sleep." But as Daniel locked eyes with him, the tremor in the priest's voice betrayed him. For the first time, his words rang hollow. The unease in the room deepened, and the truth that everyone was beginning to suspect felt closer than ever. In that moment, Daniel's question shattered the heavy silence in the church, echoing like a stone cast into a still lake. The ripples of uncertainty spread quickly among the mourners. "What do you mean, how did she die?" Father Jonathan responded, his voice defensive, the tension evident. "I found her myself in her bed," he added hastily. "She passed away peacefully, in her sleep." He repeated the statement, almost as if he was trying to convince himself as much as the crowd. Daniel, undeterred, took a deliberate step forward, his gaze locked on the priest. "But why was Amelia alone? And why were you the first to find her? Doesn't that seem a bit unusual?" he asked. His calm yet probing tone sent a fresh wave of murmurs through the congregation. The unease in the air thickened as the whispering grew louder. Wide-eyed children clung to their parents, not fully grasping the gravity of the moment but sensing the tension. Meanwhile, the adults exchanged skeptical glances, their suspicions silently mounting. Father Jonathan's face flushed red, a deep anger barely concealed beneath his veneer of authority. His composure, which he had fought to maintain, began to crack. With a sudden and forceful stomp, he silenced the murmuring. "This is absurd," he exclaimed, his voice booming across the room, teetering on the edge of a shout. "You are causing an uproar in a sacred space, disrespecting the memory of a beloved woman." His hand trembled as he pointed accusingly at Daniel. "You and that dog, leave here immediately." There was an unmistakable edge of desperation in the priest's voice, despite the authority he attempted to project. The crowd sensed it, their unease now mingling with curiosity. Why was Father Jonathan so eager to dismiss the situation? Daniel hesitated for a brief moment, but then Max, standing loyally at his side, let out a sharp and commanding bark. The sound broke through the tension like a challenge, emboldening Daniel to continue. The room felt charged with anticipation as Daniel met the priest's glare with unwavering resolve. He realized, in that moment, that he had struck a nerve, uncovering something the priest was desperate to keep hidden. Slowly, deliberately, Daniel reached for Max's collar and stood tall, his defiant gaze sweeping over the silent congregation. With one last piercing look at Father Jonathan, he turned toward the door, his steps steady. As Daniel and Max began to exit, the murmurs among the crowd grew louder. The weight of curious and suspicious stares pressed against Daniel's back, but he didn't falter. He knew he couldn't walk away from this, not now, not when the pieces of a much larger mystery were falling into place. Outside the church, the air felt cooler, the quiet of the surrounding cemetery unsettling. The faint rustle of leaves whispered secrets only the wind could carry. Max wagged his tail, his sharp eyes scanning the area as though he were on a mission. Daniel crouched beside him, patting his head. "You're onto something, aren't you?" he murmured. The dog's eager expression said everything. "Come on, buddy," Daniel whispered, rising to his feet. "We've got work to do." Together, man and dog moved forward, their determination unshaken. As the cold wind swept through the cemetery, Daniel couldn't help but feel they were being guided, not by chance, but by something far greater. Ethan seemed to have an innate sense of direction as if guided by an unseen hand. Determined to unravel the mystery, he decided the first step was to learn more about Amelia's life. Her house, a quaint stone cottage on the edge of the dense woods, seemed like the natural place to start. The property was surrounded by a garden that appeared to have been untouched for years, with overgrown shrubs and wildflowers swaying gently in the breeze. As Ethan approached the house, he noticed the front door was slightly ajar. It gave him an uneasy feeling, as though someone had left in haste, leaving behind more questions than answers. Pushing the door open, Ethan stepped inside and was immediately greeted by a cold draft. A shiver ran down his spine. Dust blanketed the furniture, and faint footprints trailed across the floorboards, hinting that someone had been there recently. Max, his loyal German shepherd, sniffed the air curiously, his ears alert. Ethan followed Max's lead, moving cautiously through the dimly lit rooms. The house felt heavy, as though it carried the weight of secrets. He began to explore, opening drawers, rifling through shelves, and scanning the surfaces for any clues. The smell of old wood and paper filled the air as Ethan sifted through the remnants of Amelia's life. In one corner of the living room, Ethan's attention was drawn to a small wooden box sitting on a weathered table. The box appeared out of place, as though it had been recently used. Opening it, Ethan found a collection of letters and faded photographs. The edges of the paper were yellowed with age, and the ink had begun to fade. He sat down and began to read through the letters carefully. The content of the letters stunned him. They hinted at secret meetings and whispered conversations Amelia had with individuals outside the village. But it was one specific letter, handwritten by Amelia herself, that made Ethan's heart race. In it, Amelia mentioned Father John by name, alluding to the fact that she had uncovered something damning about him. Her words were careful but hinted at fear of what she had discovered and its implications. Ethan glanced at Max, who seemed restless, pacing the room as if he, too, sensed the gravity of the situation. Determined to dig deeper, Ethan continued his search. His eyes caught sight of a picture frame hanging crookedly on the wall. Behind it, he discovered a small key taped to the back. What could this open? Ethan murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. Max responded with a short bark, his tail wagging as though encouraging Ethan to keep going. Next to the key, Ethan noticed a photograph of Amelia standing beside Father John, the church visible in the background. His eyes zeroed in on a peculiar detail, a small metal box resting on the ground near the priest's feet. It matched the description from Amelia's letter, where she had mentioned the priest hiding money in such a box. "We're on the right track, Max," Ethan said, giving the dog a quick pat on the head. The discovery filled Ethan with a renewed sense of determination. With the small key in hand and Max by his side, he knew he was closing in on the truth. "If Amelia wanted us to find this," Ethan muttered, "then it's the answer we've been looking for." His next step was clear: uncover what Father John had been hiding. Ethan decided to return to the village center, where he could piece together more of the mystery. The town seemed serene on the surface, but Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something dark lurked beneath its tranquil exterior. To gather more information, Ethan headed to the local library, an old brick building filled with dusty books and forgotten records. After hours of searching, he found an old town photo album. As he flipped through the pages, his eyes landed on a series of photographs featuring Amelia. In one image, she stood beside Father John, her expression tense, almost fearful. Ethan felt his suspicions deepen. Whatever Amelia had uncovered, it was tied to Father John, and it was bigger than he had imagined. The most striking aspect of the photo was Amelia's expression, a look of unease, almost as if she had stumbled upon something deeply unsettling. Her features betrayed worry, not the joy one might expect. What had Amelia uncovered? Ethan studied the photograph closely, his eyes catching a small detail that could have easily been missed: a metal box on the edge of the frame. It was identical to the one he had seen in a photograph back at Amelia's house. His curiosity grew. That box had to hold the answers he was looking for. Driven by determination, Ethan returned to Amelia's house, his mind racing with possibilities. If she had left more clues, this was the time to find them. Back in the dimly lit house, the air was thick with an eerie stillness, broken only by the soft creak of floorboards under Ethan's boots. With Max at his side, sniffing every corner, Ethan resumed his search. His fingers brushed against a heavy curtain in the living room. On a hunch, he pulled it aside, revealing a hidden cabinet built into the wall. Inside, Ethan discovered a leather-bound notebook, Amelia's diary. The worn cover and delicate pages spoke of years of secrets. Ethan's hands trembled as he flipped through the entries, Max sitting attentively beside him, as though sensing the gravity of the moment. The entries painted a chilling picture. Amelia had uncovered a network of corruption within the church, orchestrated by Father John himself. Page after page detailed how he had embezzled large sums of money from the congregation under the guise of donations and tithes. Ethan's pulse quickened as he read Amelia's words: "He's stealing from everyone, using their trust against them. It's all in that box. If anyone finds out, he'll stop at nothing to silence them." The weight of Amelia's discovery was overwhelming. Among the pages, Ethan found an envelope filled with photographs. One in particular made his stomach churn: Father John standing beside an old statue inside the church, the metal box conspicuously placed at its base. The positioning suggested that the box had been hidden there, out of sight yet within reach. Ethan exchanged a look with Max, who wagged his tail in silent encouragement. "She found everything," Ethan murmured, his voice barely audible. "That's why she was in danger." Ethan knew the next step was inevitable. The answers lay within that box. The church, steeped in shadows and secrecy, held the final piece of the puzzle. Gathering Amelia's diary and photographs, Ethan felt the enormity of the task ahead. With Max by his side, he left the house, his resolve stronger than ever. As they walked through the narrow village streets, the faint glow of lanterns illuminated their path. The night air carried a stillness that only heightened Ethan's sense of urgency. Each step felt heavier than the last, his adrenaline building with every passing moment. He glanced down at Max, who trotted confidently beside him, ears perked and eyes alert. "We're getting close, boy," Ethan whispered. Arriving at the church, Ethan paused to ensure no one was watching. The old structure loomed before him, its towering spire cutting into the dark sky. The wooden doors stood slightly ajar, as if inviting him in. Taking a deep breath, Ethan stepped inside. The interior was silent, cloaked in shadows that seemed to stretch infinitely. Max moved ahead cautiously, his nose low to the ground, guiding Ethan as if he knew exactly where to go. Ethan's flashlight illuminated the dim corners of the church. The sense of foreboding grew stronger with each step. The photo of the statue lingered in his mind. He moved purposefully, scanning the room for the figure he had seen in the image. The secrets of the church, and of Father John, were finally within reach. Ethan's mind raced as he replayed the photo he had seen. The metal box was hidden beneath one of the old statues. Walking slowly, Ethan approached a statue of a saint positioned in a shadowed corner of the church. The figure's stone face bore a stern, watchful expression, as though guarding something of great significance. Ethan knelt before it, his hands trembling as they skimmed the base of the statue, searching for any clue. His fingers brushed against something soft, a small piece of fabric tucked into a hidden recess. Pulling it aside, he revealed the box Amelia had described in her diary. His heart pounded as he lifted the box, its cold surface sending a chill through him. Beside him, Max wagged his tail excitedly, as if he understood the gravity of the discovery. Ethan carefully opened the lid, and his breath hitched at the sight inside. Bundles of money, neatly rolled and labeled, filled the box. The labels bore the names of congregants and the amounts of their donations. But that wasn't all. Beneath the money lay a small key, its brass surface glinting faintly in the dim light filtering through the stained glass windows. "A key," Ethan murmured, turning it over in his hand. What could it open? As he pondered, something else caught his eye, a yellowed piece of paper folded beneath the cash. Gently removing it, Ethan unfolded the document. It was a map, crude yet precise, with a red circle marking a location inside the church. Next to the circle were two words scrawled in a hurried hand: church storage. A wave of understanding washed over Ethan. "This must be where she discovered everything," he muttered, glancing at Max. The dog let out a soft bark, as though urging him onward. Ethan nodded, determination hardening his features. "Let's go, boy. We're not stopping now." With the map and key in hand, Ethan began his search for the hidden storage. The church grew eerily silent around him, the atmosphere heavy with an almost tangible sense of foreboding. Max stayed close, his ears twitching at every creak and whisper of the ancient structure. Guided by the map, Ethan moved toward the altar, where the marked location appeared to be. The red circle led him to a small, inconspicuous door behind the altar, nearly camouflaged by its surroundings. Few would have even noticed it, much less guessed it concealed anything important. As Ethan approached, a chill ran through him, the air growing colder and heavier. He inserted the key into the lock, the metal groaning softly as it turned. Taking a deep breath, he pushed the door open. The hinges creaked loudly, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. Ethan flicked on his flashlight, the beam cutting through the gloom, and began to descend, Max following close behind. Each step echoed faintly, the sound swallowed by the oppressive silence. The air grew damp, and the faint scent of mildew wafted up to meet them. At the bottom of the stairs, a shadowy corridor stretched ahead, its walls slick and cold. A faint, flickering light at the end of the corridor beckoned them forward. As they approached, Ethan's ears caught the faint sound of chains clinking, sending a shiver down his spine. "Amelia," he called softly, his voice barely more than a whisper. The only reply was the echo of his own voice bouncing off the stone walls. Finally, the corridor opened into a dimly lit room, a single bulb casting uneven shadows across the damp floor. Ethan froze, his breath catching. There, in the center of the room, sat Amelia, her hands and feet bound by heavy chains. Her face was pale, her eyes hollow, but she was alive. "Amelia!" Ethan exclaimed, rushing forward. Her voice was faint, but her relief was evident. "Ethan, you found me," she whispered, her lips curving into the barest hint of a smile. Tears pricked Ethan's eyes as he knelt beside her, reaching for the chains that bound her. "You're safe now," he promised, his voice trembling. Before Ethan could reach Amelia, heavy footsteps echoed behind him. Turning swiftly, he found Father Charles standing in the doorway, gripping a wooden plank tightly. The priest's face was contorted with rage, his eyes blazing with fury. "You shouldn't be here," Father Charles bellowed, his voice distorted by anger. "I told you, you would never find her." Ethan barely had time to react as the priest lunged forward, swinging the plank with all his might. Ethan dodged, but the edge of the plank grazed his shoulder, sending him stumbling to the cold, damp floor. Disoriented, he raised his hands defensively, his mind racing. How could a man sworn to embody peace and faith behave so violently? The image of Father Charles as a kind spiritual leader shattered in an instant. As Ethan scrambled to regain his footing, Father Charles lifted the plank again, his intent clear. But before he could deliver another blow, Max sprang into action. With a fierce bark that echoed through the stone basement, the loyal dog lunged at the priest, clamping his teeth onto Charles's leg. The priest let out a scream of pain that reverberated through the room, his grip on the plank faltering. Desperation took over as Father Charles tried to shake Max off, but the dog held firm, determined to protect Ethan. The plank clattered to the ground, and in his panic, the priest pushed Max away and limped toward the stairs, yelling incoherently. Ethan seized the moment, his heart pounding, and chased after him. "He can't get away," Ethan muttered to himself, adrenaline surging through his veins. The truth had to come to light, and he wasn't about to let the man escape. Max, relentless in his pursuit, stayed hot on the priest's heels. As they burst out of the church and into the street, the commotion drew the attention of the villagers. Curious and alarmed, they gathered, whispering to one another as they watched Father Charles, a man they had trusted, limping and pursued by Ethan and Max. Ethan raised his voice, his tone sharp and commanding. "Stop. Everyone needs to know the truth about what's been happening here." The priest stumbled, attempting to evade capture, but Max was quicker. With one final leap, the dog knocked him to the ground, pinning him in place. Villagers hesitated, their shock evident, before several of the men stepped forward to restrain Father Charles. Breathing heavily, Ethan stood before the crowd. "Listen," he began, his voice steady but urgent. "This man has betrayed all of you. He's been stealing from the church, hiding your donations, and worse, he kidnapped Amelia to silence her when she discovered the truth." Gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd. Ethan gestured to the church and led the villagers inside. With trembling hands, he opened the metal box he had found earlier. The bundles of money, the labeled donations, and the map to the secret storage were revealed. The villagers stared, wide-eyed, as the damning evidence confirmed Ethan's claims. Finally, Ethan led the group to the hidden basement, where Amelia still sat, her face pale but alive. Relief swept through the crowd as they saw her, safe but shaken. Max wagged his tail proudly, sensing his mission was complete. With Father Charles restrained and his crimes laid bare, the truth was undeniable. The village was stunned, but justice had prevailed, and the dark mystery had finally been solved. The entire village stood in stunned silence, grappling with the shocking revelations. Ethan knew, however, that Father Charles was not the type to surrender easily. As the villagers huddled together, discussing their next steps, the priest seized the moment. His eyes burned with hatred, and in one swift, desperate move, he broke free from those holding him. With a look of pure malice, Father Charles grabbed a discarded wooden plank from the ground and charged toward Ethan. "You understand nothing," he roared, his voice dripping with resentment. "You should never have gotten involved." Ethan froze momentarily, caught off guard by the priest's sudden aggression. The surreal image of a man who once embodied peace now transformed into a figure of rage left him momentarily paralyzed. As Father Charles closed the gap, the wooden plank raised high, Ethan's mind raced to make sense of the chaotic scene. But before the blow could land, Max sprang into action. The loyal dog leaped with precision, sinking his teeth into the priest's leg. Father Charles screamed in pain, the sound echoing across the village square. The force of Max's attack sent the priest sprawling to the ground, thrashing wildly in an attempt to break free. Ethan snapped out of his shock and rushed forward. He grabbed at the plank, trying to wrestle it away from Father Charles while avoiding his flailing limbs. Max, undeterred, held firm, growling fiercely as he maintained his grip on the priest's leg. The scene erupted into a chaotic struggle, shouts, barks, and gasps filling the air. With a desperate shove, Father Charles managed to push Max off for a brief moment. Limping and clutching his injured leg, he scrambled to his feet and began to run toward the village square. "He won't get away," Ethan muttered under his breath, his determination surging. Max was already ahead of him, barking loudly as he pursued the fleeing priest. The villagers, drawn by the commotion, began to gather in the square. They stood in disbelief, watching as Max closed in on Father Charles. With another powerful leap, Max brought the priest down, pinning him to the cobblestones. This time, there would be no escape. Ethan caught up, breathing heavily, and turned to the crowd. "You all need to hear the truth," he said, his voice loud and clear. "Father Charles has betrayed this village. He's stolen from the church and from all of you. And worse, he kidnapped Amelia to keep her from exposing his crimes." The crowd gasped, murmurs rippling through the gathering. Ethan held up the small metal box for all to see. "Inside this are the donations you entrusted to the church, stolen and hidden by this man." One by one, villagers stepped forward to restrain Father Charles. Ethan opened the box, revealing the stacks of labeled money. The proof was undeniable, and the weight of the priest's betrayal hung heavy in the air. The truth was out, and justice was finally within reach. Ethan held up the key for all to see, explaining it unlocked a hidden storage room within the church. The villagers, eager for answers, followed him closely. Together with Max by his side, Ethan led the crowd through the dimly lit corridors to the concealed room. Inside, they found Amelia, weak and chained but very much alive. A collective sigh of relief swept through the onlookers, their faces a mixture of astonishment and gratitude. Amelia, though visibly exhausted, managed a faint smile as she realized she was finally safe. Max bounded toward her, wagging his tail enthusiastically, his mission now complete. The touching reunion brought tears to many eyes, and the emotional weight of the moment silenced the crowd. It was clear that the truth had finally come to light. Meanwhile, Father Charles, now fully exposed, attempted to stammer out excuses. His words fell on deaf ears. The community, once loyal and trusting, saw him for what he truly was, a man who had betrayed their faith and trust. The proof of his crimes, from the stolen donations to Amelia's kidnapping, left no room for doubt. The villagers no longer cared for his justifications. They had seen the truth with their own eyes. Ethan and Max had not only uncovered the dark side of someone the community had once revered, but they had also restored hope and justice. With Father Charles detained and the secrets exposed, the village could begin the process of healing and rebuilding. Amelia, her voice trembling with emotion, thanked Ethan and Max for risking everything to save her. "You've given me a second chance," she said, her gratitude evident in her eyes. The crowd echoed her sentiments, their admiration for Ethan and his loyal dog palpable. Father Charles was taken away by the authorities, his shadow finally lifted from the village. As the days passed, the residents came together to rebuild their community on foundations of trust, honesty, and transparency. The dark secrets that had once plagued them now served as a catalyst for a renewed commitment to integrity and unity. Ethan, having risked so much to uncover the truth, decided to stay in the village. He dedicated himself to helping Amelia recover and became an integral part of the community. His courage and unwavering determination inspired everyone, earning him a place in their hearts. As for Max, the loyal companion was hailed as a local hero. Children surrounded him with laughter and pats, while adults praised his bravery. The entire village celebrated the dog's role in bringing justice and truth to light. United by sacrifice and resilience, the villagers embraced a new beginning, one filled with hope and honesty. The story of Alex, Max, and Grace provides valuable lessons and advice that are deeply relevant to modern life. First, it highlights the power of persistence and determination in uncovering the truth. Alex's refusal to give up, even when faced with skepticism and resistance, teaches us to trust our instincts and remain committed to justice, no matter how challenging the journey may be. This is a crucial reminder to stand firm in the face of adversity and to believe in the importance of doing what is right, even when it is uncomfortable or unpopular. Max, the loyal dog, demonstrates the importance of paying attention to nonverbal cues and trusting the instincts of those around us. In our busy, technology-driven world, we often overlook subtle signs that might guide us toward important truths or solutions. Max's actions remind us to remain observant, listen carefully, and consider perspectives beyond our own. Finally, the story encourages communities to prioritize transparency and integrity. Grace's safe return and the village's transformation underscore how confronting wrongdoing and fostering accountability can rebuild trust and create a brighter future. In our own lives, we should strive to address injustices, foster unity, and ensure that honesty forms the foundation of our relationships and communities.